aim to connect a region of over 600 million bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles. You're watching ASEAN in Focus on tonight's headlines. At least 12 people died and 230 rescued after a fire engulfed a ferry in the southern Philippines. Four weeks after a Philippine tanker loaded with 800,000 liters of thick oil sank off the central island of Mindoro, the vessel is still leaking and authorities have banned fishing and swimming indefinitely, leaving thousands of fishermen wondering how long they can survive. The U.S. condemned Myanmar's junta for dissolving the party of deposed leader Aung San Suu Kyi and warned that the move would bring more instability. And images captured by a CCTV camera show Indonesia's Mount Anak Krakatoa erupting and spewing hot ash and clouds. At least 12 people died and 230 were rescued after a fire engulfed a ferry in the southern Philippines, according to authorities today. The Lady Mary Joy 3 was traveling from Zamboanga City on Mindanao Island to Jolo Island in Sulu Province when the fire broke out late on Wednesday, prompting passengers to jump overboard, according to disaster officer Nixon Alonzo. Now, rescuers, including the Philippine Coast Guard and fishermen, saved 195 passengers and 35 crew as the blaze ripped through the ferry off Baluk-Baluk Island in Basilan Province. 14 people were injured, 7 were still missing. Basilan Governor Jim Saliman said there could be more people missing because the number of passengers on the vessel exceeded the 205 listed in the manifest. It wasn't clear how the fire started. Survivors were taken to Zamboanga and Basilan, where the injured received treatment for burns. 4 weeks after a Philippine tanker loaded with 800,000 liters of thick oil sank off the central island of Mindoro, the vessel is still leaking and authorities have banned fishing and swimming indefinitely, leaving thousands of fishermen wondering how long they can survive. Take a look.
Yung kabuhayan po, lahat.
Tumigil sa araw na yun?
Kasi pinagbawal pong mangisda. Dahil ang pinagkakakitaan po lahat ng tao dito, puro sa isda, lahat. Yung saging naman po dito, binagyo, wala ding mga bunga lahat. Ang niyog naman po, yung ano lang, every 2 months. Ang kailangan po dito ng tao, pinansyal.
Baka sir, pag tumagal pa ito, baka yung isang anak patigil muna. Pag wala namang mapagkunan.
Nung po kasing nalubog yung barko, February 28, tas mga 4 na araw po, dumating na po yung langis dito sa amin. Grabe po talaga ang nangyaring pinsala po, tulad po sa aming mga mangingisda. Ay talagang mahalaga po sa amin ng dagat, gawa ng dyan lang talaga kami umaasa yung... Kasi po ang ano namin dyan, hapon at saka umaga, tanghali po. Talagang yan po lang ang pinagkakakitaan namin.
Paula is 23 barangays. Sa 23 barangays, we have 11 barangays ay shoreline. And yung shoreline na yun, halos lahat ng nakatira doon ay fisher folks. Lahat halos doon ay umaasa sa karagatan. And yung amin, kahit hindi kami nakatira doon, umaasa kami doon. Dahil itinitinda namin, kukunin namin, ititinda sa ibang bayan. So, bakit ganun kalaki ang sama ng loob ko? Kasi wala yung hanapbuhay nila everyday. Paano ko sila pakakainin?
The government estimates at least 5,000 hectares of coral reefs, seaweed, and mangroves have been affected. Mangroves can suffocate if oil covers their roots, while corals, breeding grounds for many fish species, can die or struggle to grow and reproduce if exposed. It'll take at least 6 months to clean up the spill, but the recovery could be years long. Some oil has also drifted north to the Verde Island Passage between Mindoro and the Philippine main island of Luzon. The passage is near the top of the Coral Triangle, an area of water spanning down to Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and East Timor that is called the Amazon of the seas because of its rich marine life. Several countries, including the U.S., Japan, and South Korea, are now helping. The owner of the tanker said anyone affected by the spill could seek compensation. In other news, Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen arrived in New York for a visit that has triggered threats of reprisal by China if she meets with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, and U.S. warnings for Beijing not to overreact. Take a look.
Transits by high-level Taiwan authorities are not visits, they are private and unofficial, and they are not new. Every Taiwan president has transited the United States. President Tsai has transited the U.S. 6 times since taking office in 2016. This will be her 7th transit. These transits have always been consistent with long-standing U.S. practice, consistent with the unofficial nature of our relations with Taiwan. That transits of the United States are based on long-standing U.S. practice, consistent with our unofficial nature of relations with Taiwan. There is no reason to take countermeasures. There's no reason for Beijing to turn this transit, which is consistent with long-standing U.S. policy, into something it's not, or to overreact. As I said previously, we oppose any unilateral changes to the status quo from either side. We don't support Taiwan independence, and we continue to expect that cross-strait differences be resolved through peaceful means.
过去的错误不能为今天的错误开脱，犯错次数的叠加不能提供任何合法性。台湾当局领导人赴美过境是假，谋求突破，宣扬台独是真。不是中方过度反应，而是美方一味纵容支持台独分裂势力，性质恶劣。中方坚决反对任何形式的美台官方往来，坚决反对台湾当局领导人以任何名义、任何理由竄美，坚决反对美方违反一个中国原则，同台湾当局进行任何形式的接触。中方已经多次就蔡英文过境竄美问题向美方提出严正交涉。
Now, stopovers in the U.S. during the long flights have occurred with little notice in the past, but are getting increased scrutiny this year amid soaring U.S.-China tensions. Tsai Ing-wen departed Taiwan on Wednesday for the 10-day trip, stopping in New York and L.A. while en route to and from Guatemala and Belize, according to Taiwan's foreign ministry. The Central American countries are 2 of just 14 states that officially recognize Taiwan over China. Tsai's trip comes after Honduras said earlier this month that it was switching recognition to Beijing. Now, the U.S. also responded by saying China should not use Tsai's stopover as a pretext to act aggressively around the Taiwan Strait. Again, let's listen in.
It is Taiwan's decision to make these transits based on their own travel. Transits are not visits. They are private and they're unofficial. I would also remind everyone that this is not new. Every Taiwan president has transited the United States. President Tsai Ing-wen herself has transited the U.S. 6 times since taking office in 2016, each time without incident. In all previous transits, she met with members of Congress as well as state and local officials and had public appearances. She has also transited through both New York and Los Angeles before, not uncommon. The People's Republic of China should not use this transit as a pretext to step up any aggressive activity around the Taiwan Strait. The United States and China have differences when it comes to Taiwan, but we have managed those differences for more than 40 years.
New threats from China over the potential that the House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, meets with the President of Taiwan next week in L.A. With one official, China's Taiwan Affairs Office spokesperson Zhu Fenglian calling it a provocation that could lead to retaliation. She said, quote, if she engages with U.S. House Speaker McCarthy, it'll be another provocation that seriously violates the One China principle, undermines China's sovereignty and territorial integrity and undermines peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. And we are resolutely opposed to that, and we will take resolute measures to fight back, unquote. Taiwan's president, for her part, she's already pushing back because she says pressure like this is not going to stop her from meeting other world leaders. Now, this is all a big deal because China claims the island as part of its territory to be retaken one day. And the U.S. has this long-standing policy of recognizing Beijing as the sole legal government of China. The U.S. has had this strategic ambiguity in Taiwan. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, her visit triggered an angry response from Beijing, with the Chinese military conducting drills at an unprecedented scale around the island. In other news, the United States condemned Myanmar's junta for dissolving the party of deposed leader Aung San Suu Kyi and warned that the move would bring more instability. Myanmar's junta-stacked election commission on Tuesday announced that the National League for Democracy would be dissolved for failing to re-register under a military-drafted electoral law. The move comes as the junta prepares to hold elections that opponents believe would only aim to cement the power of the military, which toppled Suu Kyi's elected government in February 2021.
So, Simon, we strongly condemn the Burma military regime's decision to abolish 40 political parties, including, as you so noted, the National League for Democracy. Any election without the participation of all stakeholders in Burma would not be and cannot be considered free or fair. And given the widespread opposition to military rule, the regime's unilateral push towards elections likely will escalate instability. We continue to support efforts by all of those working to establish genuine and inclusive democracy in Burma. People and public's opposition to the military rule, the regime's unilateral push towards elections, will unfortunately lead to increased instability.
Any comment, Mr. Chi?
Now, Suu Kyi co-founded the NLD in 1988 and won a landslide victory in 1990 elections that were subsequently annulled by the then junta. The U.S. has vowed to keep up pressure on Myanmar. In its latest move last week, the Treasury Department warned of the risk of U.S. sanctions on anyone who provides jet fuel to the junta. But the U.S. has stopped short of taking action against Myanmar's state-owned oil and gas company, with neighboring Thailand, a close U.S. ally, worried about the move's impact. In other news, images captured by a CCTV camera show Indonesia's Mount Anak Krakatoa erupting and spewing hot ash and clouds. Now, Mount Anak Krakatoa, or Krakatoa, which means child of Krakatoa, erupted 4 times according to officials, with the biggest followed by another that sent a column of smoke and ash 1,500 meters above its crater. This is part of an eruption phase associated with the formation of a new body for the volcano, according to Oktori Prambada, an official at the Center of Volcanology and Geological Hazard Mitigation. In 2018, its crater partly collapsed when a major eruption sent huge chunks of the volcano sliding into the ocean, triggering a tsunami that killed more than 400 people and injured thousands. There were no immediate reports of injuries or damage on Tuesday. Prambada said the volcano's alert status remained at the second highest level after the series of eruptions, with authorities imposing an exclusion zone of 5 kilometers around the crater. Anak Krakatoa, which sits in a strait that separates the islands of Java and Sumatra, has been sporadically active since it emerged from the sea at the beginning of last century in the caldera formed after the 1883 eruption of Mount Krakatoa. The country has nearly 130 active volcanoes. Greater fiscal accountability has allowed the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, to withstand the shockwaves created by recent global developments, according to the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. In the gala seminar of the 2023 ASEAN Chairmanship on Indonesia on Wednesday, BSP Governor Felipe Medalla said fiscal discipline that sprung from the 1997 to 98 Asian financial crisis, or AFC, has made the regional's banking sector resilient.
They all knew the memory of the Asian financial crisis. And to make things even better, we had a boom in BPO. Plus the remittances, we had recurring current account surpluses. And with the inflows coming from the, as a result of very expansive monetary policies in the U.S., our reserves increased from $45 billion to $90. Well, the people running the banks, they were probably the vice presidents or the managing directors in 1997. So the banks were well capitalized and quite liquid.
Now, this was Medalia's response to a question on how Asian banks have shown resilience amid the banking turmoil experienced by the advanced countries like the U.S. and Europe. Apart from this, Medalia noted that ASEAN central bank governors were prudent in maintaining adequate reserves that served as the buffer of countries. Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said in a troubled global environment that includes the U.S. and China being at odds over many intractable issues, countries in Asia need to draw close and work together and with external partners. Prime Minister Lee was speaking at the annual Boao Forum for Asia, described as Asia's Davos, where world and corporate leaders have gathered to discuss topics including the digital economy and security. Let's listen in.
However, realizing Asia's promise depends on the region remaining stable, inclusive, and open. Like every other region, Asia is affected by the troubled global environment and strategic tensions. The COVID pandemic severely disrupted our societies, our economies, our supply chains. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has gravely violated the UN Charter and international law and profoundly undermined the rules-based international order. Most worrying is the state of relations between the US and China. Big powers have a heavy responsibility to maintain stable and workable relations with one another, because any clash between them will have grievous consequences for themselves and the world. And yet, the US and China are at odds over many intractable issues, including trade and investments, supply chains, cybersecurity, emerging and critical technologies, as well as freedom of navigation. We hope that China and the United States will succeed in stabilizing their relationship and establish sufficient mutual trust and respect to cooperate in areas where their interests are aligned. The economic cooperation between China and its Asian neighbors will be more robust if it is underpinned by a sound, broader relationship which builds mutual trust and fosters regional stability. There are many bilateral and regional issues that need to be resolved, and they should be managed in the spirit of goodwill and cooperation, peacefully and in accordance with international law, giving full weight to the perspectives and interests of countries big and small.
Now, Prime Minister Lee said that economic cooperation between China and its Asian neighbors will be stronger if it is underpinned by a stable, broader relationship which will encourage mutual trust. He also called for Asia to always remain an open region and nurture ties with the U.S., Europe, and other parts of the world. In other news beyond the region, parents of school children gathered outside a Nashville elementary school where a shooter killed 3 9-year-old children and 3 staff members reflect on the mental toll that such instances of deadly violence take on American kids. Take a look.
It's sickening. I mean, it's not the first time we've talked about school shootings, but obviously it's the first time that it's hit so close. You know, I mean, it's not just Nashville, it's our neighbor. And so that's been an extra level of a gut punch, you know.
We just wonder now, are our kids still safe in schools? You know, you thinking that your kids are safe at school, and they're not even safe in the schools anymore. You know, it hurts. And, you know, it hurts, especially us having to talk to our kids at these ages, because we never thought we'd have to talk to our kids about things like this at this age. You know what I mean? They're in elementary school, and we're having to tell them about what to do and prepare for if, you know, something like this happens. You know what I mean? And it's just, we got to find some kind of solution for it. We have to.
It was horrific and horrible, but unfortunately, it's becoming more prevalent and almost more of a norm, which isn't okay. I teach young children, and that's just hard. It's hard to understand it. But I feel really strongly that we need to do something about getting guns out of people's hands and off the streets.
The problem is not that we don't know what to do. We do know what to do. There is evidence-based solutions for the gun violence problem in this country and the gun violence problems in the schools. We just don't have the people in power with the political will to see it through. And so holding those people accountable, continuing to tell your story, and just pushing, always pushing. This is what we have to do. I'm never going to stop.
Yeah, I have elementary school-aged kids, and I'm sick of being scared to send them to school. I'm sick of hearing about kids the same age as them going to school and not coming home, and the agony of what that would be like as a parent is like more than I can even fathom. And so I want our legislators, our lawmakers to have to face.
Now, the shooter who killed 6 people, 3 of them children, at the small academy had 7 firearms, all legally purchased. 2 assault rifles and a handgun were used during the rampage, according to police. For some, this confirms the need to ban assault rifles, weapons of war designed to cause maximum casualties, which are often used in mass shootings. President Joe Biden, a Democrat who has long advocated for such a ban, on Monday repeated his well-worn call for Congress to pass legislation without delay. But with the lower house of Congress, the House of Representatives, in Republican hands, the call has so far fallen on deaf ears. Republicans largely maintain that any gun control is a violation of the constitutional right to bear arms. According to the National Center for Educational Statistics, 97% of schools already control access to their buildings and 57% to their grounds. But as the massacres continue, some are fortifying their campuses. A study reported on by the New York Times last year showed schools are spending billions of dollars each year to increase security against mass shootings. Metal detectors are increasingly popular. Nearly 15% of high schools and 10% of middle schools are equipped with them, according to the NCES. Bitter and earthy, fit for instant brews only. Robusta coffee has a dire reputation, but a small group of farmers in Vietnam is trying to turn the bean's fortunes around as a warming world threatens the industry. Take a look.
Robusta nó rất là phù hợp đối với cà phê phin và espresso. Hầu như mọi người cũng cái lượng uống phin và espresso nó cũng nhiều. Nên là nếu mà Robusta mình làm tốt trong cái vấn đề làm pha rô thì đối với pha rô thì uống nó cũng sẽ ngon, không kém Arabica. Nó sẽ có body cân bằng và cái hương vị của nó cũng không kém nhiều so với Arabica. gần đây khoảng gần 1 năm trở lại đây thì ở thế giới cũng rất là nhiều nước họ tìm đến khoai Robusta rất là nhiều, và cái sự quan tâm của họ cũng đang dần mở rộng. Cái việc mà Việt Nam mình mở rộng bán khoai Robusta là nó đang theo chiều hướng cực kỳ tốt.
Cần phát triển cái vị tốt lên, giảm cái vị xấu xuống, thì có phương pháp đó thì mình cứ phát triển lên thì mình uống, mình làm được một mẻ, mình lấy cái hương vị nó khác biệt hoàn toàn. Ủa sao Robusta sao cái hương vị giống như trái cây, có khi mà nó ra sầu riêng cũng có khi ra mít cũng có, vị cá cũng có, mà ai uống cũng khen ngon. Tôi rất mong muốn, cái thứ nhất là tôi muốn cho thế giới biết, khẳng định thế giới biết là Việt Nam có Robusta.
And finally, to New York now, where the Socrates Sculpture Park displays 5 installations addressing the urgency of climate change as part of the new exhibition Sink or Swim, Climate Futures. Joanne Soriano got to talk to a Phil-On artist there. Joanne.
What can an exhibit on climate change teach us about Filipino history in the United States? At Socrates Sculpture Park in Long Island City, New York, a show entitled Sink or Swim, Climate Futures is currently exhibiting 5 projects addressing the urgency and challenges of climate change. Among the various site-specific installations is one structure that will be very familiar to Filipinos. This piece, called Disappearing St. Malo, was designed by Filipino-American artist Taiwan Concepcion, who we were able to speak with.
Disappearing St. Malo is a participatory public art installation. It's a freestanding structure made of dimensional lumber, bamboo, and it has a thatch roof made of industrial-grade mylar. The structure itself reimagines the architecture of the first permanent Asian American settlement in the United States, which was a floating fishing village in Louisiana established by Filipino sailors. One of the most interesting parts of the history of St. Malo is that it's so misunderstood. There is still a lot of things we don't know about St. Malo, and a lot of the times throughout history, the men of St. Malo, they were called Manila men, painted as pirates, they were painted as eaters of human flesh. But they were actually very autonomous. They were making money. They were changing the fishing industry in Louisiana. So they were powerful. So I wanted to remember this place. I wanted to talk about this history because I'm 30 years old and just discovering that the first permanent Asian American settlement was by Filipinos. And so part of my work, wanting to bring visibility and recognition for our history is important to me.
Joanne Soriano, Long Island City, New York. Eagle News, we live in extraordinary times.
Thanks, Joanne. As my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. And that's it for tonight's broadcast. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.